What's up YouTube, Jeff back again from DopeTechDaily.com. Today I'm bringing you guys part 2 of my video comparing the LG G7 ThinQ and the Huawei P20 Pro. In the first video I looked at 5 reasons you might consider the LG G7 ThinQ over the P20 Pro. Today we're going to look at 5 reasons the P20 Pro might be worth considering over the G7 ThinQ. The very first reason that you might want to get the P20 Pro over the LG G7 ThinQ is a pretty obvious one when you look at the spec sheet. If you notice these two phones from a side profile, neither one is particularly thick. In fact, there's not really a huge difference in the thickness. The only thing you can really notice is you've got this protruding camera hump on the P20 Pro when you compare it to the one on the G7 ThinQ, but you do notice when you look at the spec sheet that the P20 Pro has a much larger battery inside. We're talking about 4,000 milliamp hours versus 3,000 milliamp hours in the G7 ThinQ, and that actually does translate to a relatively large difference in everyday use. Now I've been using both of these phones relatively frequently for the last month. I've been using the P20 Pro and I've been using the G7 ThinQ for a week. The G7 ThinQ gets about 4.5 hours screen on time on a daily use for me, while the P20 Pro easily gets 6 to 6.5 hours, sometimes even 7 hours screen on time with a 4,000 milliamp hour battery. I find it very difficult to kill the P20 Pro in daily usage. The G7 ThinQ though can easily get me through a day if it's a light day. If it's a heavier day though, it's very difficult to do so. So if you're looking for the best battery life, I would say the P20 Pro is definitely the one you want to go with. The next thing to talk about are the cameras, and the P20 Pro here, in my opinion, is slightly better than the G7 ThinQ. If you look at the spec sheet, you'll notice that the G7 ThinQ does have a dual camera, while the P20 Pro has that triple camera on the back with the Leica branding. Now, of course, the number of cameras itself is not what makes the actual photos or pictures better, one versus the other, but if we actually look at some of the photos, and I'll take you guys to my photo album that I made specifically for this video so that you can take a look, G7 versus P20 Pro, a couple of things I want to highlight. In this first photo here, this was taken with the LG G7 ThinQ. You can see the sky here, nice and blue sky, taken over a house there. If you can see a little bit better here on this side profile, you've got decent dynamic range. Now let's switch over to the one taken with the Huawei P20 Pro. You can see the dynamic range is much improved in this particular photo. And if we just switch back and forth between the two, you guys can see right there the difference between the dynamic range and the sky. It definitely brings out the blue quite a bit nicer in the sky there. And I'll drop this photo below if you guys want to take a look at it. The next one is a comparison I took of a couple of macro shots of some flowers. This was taken with the G7 ThinQ, while this one was taken with the Huawei P20 Pro. Now you'll notice the G7 ThinQ is a bit brighter. The Huawei P20 Pro, however, if we zoom in, does have a bit more detail, and you guys can check this photo out as well. I'll link it in the album below. You can see that the flower shot really is up to your opinion. I prefer this one because it brings out the green in the actual leaves behind it, captures better detail with less blurring around the edges, and it also doesn't have quite as blown out in the background with the brightness as the LG G7 ThinQ, but the argument could be made that it's a toss-up there. Next, I took a photo of these pink flowers, which are sort of grouped together. Now, this photo right here is the one taken with the G7 ThinQ, while this photo here was taken with the P20 Pro. This one I would call, again, a very, very close battle. The only real difference I can notice is the vibrancy in the green leaves in the background here, and also the bokeh on the P20 Pro appears to be a little bit better. But again, I would call this a toss-up, and these were both in good lighting conditions. Now, where the P20 Pro really shines in still photography is in low light situations. I took this photograph with the LG G7 ThinQ inside my garage of my wife's car. You can see it's completely dark inside the garage, and it doesn't capture very much of the car. This was taken with the P20 Pro's night mode, which basically does a long exposure to capture more detail and lighting when you have really, really low light conditions. Very, very impressive, and probably one of the best things that pushes me towards saying that the P20 Pro has the best camera out there right now. The final shot, I did the same test. I took this shot right here with the LG G7. You can barely see the outline or even make out what this is. This is actually the Xperia XC2 Premium. If you take the shot with the P20 Pro's night mode, you can see the outline of the phone, fingerprint sensor, camera module, and all of those nice things. So in good lighting conditions, it's very much a toss-up between these two devices. It's not like the P20 Pro is going to be way ahead in good lighting, but I do think it does have an advantage when you have lighting conditions that are very low light. Also, I like the interface better on the P20 Pro. In addition, both of these phones have an AI mode inside their camera. In fact, if you go into the LG G7, you'll see you can turn AI cam on right there. And inside of the P20 Pro, there's actually a whole bunch of different things. The AI mode is actually turned on by default. You can turn that off in the settings if you don't like it. But personally, I think that the AI mode on the Huawei P20 Pro is a little bit better at recognizing scenes like flowers, like landscapes, like blue skies, and then sharpening those photos or coloring them in the appropriate way. So software and low light performance in terms of the camera is where the P20 Pro shines. It does have quite a few special features. The next thing is actually the software itself. Now, I don't particularly love the skin that LG or Huawei put on their Android phones, but if I had to pick one that has the most features, it would have to be the P20 Pro. The Huawei phones do have this one killer feature that I talked about earlier in one of my other videos, and I'll show it to you guys really quick. That feature is private space, and what you do is you can set up a separate fingerprint to basically open up an entirely different user account. So if I use my right thumb, it takes me into my regular account with this wallpaper you guys have seen the entire video. If I use my left thumb, you'll see it takes a second here, and I put in my pattern, it'll take me into a completely separate account. You'll see it has a different wallpaper. This is actually the stock wallpaper and setup for the phone. And this can be set up with different apps, different contacts, everything. Basically like having a second account on your phone. Then you can just go ahead and switch back to your regular account if you want. This is very useful for a lot of reasons. I don't want to say what reasons people might use it for in general, but it's obviously a really cool feature and other phones just don't have it at the moment. Another reason is that the G7 doesn't really offer any new spectacular software features that LG hasn't shown off in the past, and the Huawei P20 Pro actually ships with a higher version of Android than the LG G7. We have Android 8.0 on the G7, while we have Android 8.1 on the P20 Pro. And given LG's past track record with updating phones out of the gate, I'm not quite sure that we want to say that the G7 ThinQ is going to get 8.1 at all. We might skip directly to Android P, but that could be next year. So that's something to consider if you care about updates. The fourth thing is actually something that Huawei is doing that really no other major manufacturer is doing anymore, and that's actually the IR blaster. So if you look right here, the very top of the phone, right there you've got an IR blaster which allows you to control your television using your phone. There's actually a remote app on the P20 Pro. That's a cool feature. It's missing from the LG G7. It's weird because LG used to be one of the big manufacturers that were huge fans of the IR blaster. They decided to get rid of it, and now Huawei is really the main OEM that's considering to do that. So if you really care about the IR blaster, I know there are quite a few of you out there, it's definitely a reason to go with the P20 Pro over the G7 ThinQ. Now the final one is a little bit subjective, but having used the Huawei P20 Pro for 5 weeks and having used it without a case on some of those weeks, in fact I'd say 2 or 3 of those weeks I had no case on the phone, and then using the G7 ThinQ for a week, the durability has been much better on the P20 Pro. Let me actually wipe off the back here really quick so you guys can see that in fact the P20 Pro on the back here has yet to get any scratches. You guys can see here in the light, if I just turn it, you can see there in my studio lights, I just put it around. There's no scratches at all on the back of this particular device. Now, if I do the same thing with the G7 ThinQ, let me go ahead and wipe it off just so no one can say I'm being biased here. If I do the same thing with the G7 ThinQ, you can see there are a few surface scratches right down here at the bottom. In fact, right there you can see one on video, a pretty prominent surface scratch. So I've been using this without the case as well, and it's already caught quite a few little scratches like that one. So given the past, I had the same problem with my LG G6. I would say you're definitely going to get scratches over time on the back. Of course, that can happen with any phone, but I have been impressed with the durability of the P20 Pro. No scratches on the sides or the back of the phone, despite having used it for several weeks without a case. So if durability is important to you, it certainly seems in my everyday use that the P20 Pro is holding up better than the G7 ThinQ. Alright guys, so those are 5 reasons to consider the P20 Pro over the LG G7 ThinQ. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification icon so I can make future videos like this. Find me at dopetechdaily.com, Google+, Instagram, and Twitter, the links in the description. I really appreciate you guys checking out the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot for watching.